Ken started to volunteer his time to take me to coffee and breakfast. And we would have conversations. He wanted them to be deeper, but I was in a place in my life where I wasn't willing to be vulnerable or honest. And he was one of the first people that met me with grace and forgiveness when I wasn't willing to really discuss the types of things that I needed to discuss. He fought for me. He fought with me. When I didn't feel like I was worth fighting for. Yeah, I think it was people like Ken and Janie, plus some others, that continued to pour into me with love and compassion and grace and mercy and kindness, despite the fact that my ego was in charge at that point in time. I had a lot of defense mechanisms, and I wasn't real receptive of love. I didn't love myself was the real issue. And as they continued to stand in my corner, I would bird feed them information about things that really hurt me and bothered me and why I coped with drugs and alcohol. So I would offer information from things that happened in my childhood, but I would make sure I would pay attention how they received it, because the way it was received was going to determine whether or not I was going to offer more information. I remember talking about my parents' divorce, and then I would kind of readjust my posture to a more paying attention to their body language stance. How are you receiving the most difficult parts of my story for me to talk about? And with Ken and with a few others, they would receive it with love. They weren't with no judgment, is probably the best way to put it. And so that would make me feel comfortable enough to share a little bit more information. And I would share about some childhood sexual trauma. I pay attention to how it's getting received, especially with stuff like that, because that's really vulnerable information to share. And it was met with no judgment. It was actually met with more maybe rejoicing than I would have ever thought, because they knew I was going to heal from the truth ultimately. And that's how Ken really started to earn my trust. He stayed with me in the fight until, I was free to walk on my own. Very difficult. Yeah, wearing the uniform comes with certain privileges that almost make you feel like you're above the law. You get treated differently at airports. You get treated differently at sporting events. People see you different when you're in uniform. And that's a great thing when you're in uniform. That's a very difficult thing when you're transitioning back to civilian life. So I transitioned back to civilian life with this perception that I was above the law. Not in a brash way. I wasn't driving by police cruisers at excessive speeds. It was more like a really small kind of, voice in your head that just made you feel like you don't belong in society as a normal civilian. I think that escalated an ego that kind of probably became tough for me to be around, to the people I was close to, the people that loved me most. I think that also led for me to isolate, because I would see how the ego would be received. And so I would isolate. I don't want to cause them any trouble. And so that's where mental health started to decline. So the transition from military life to civilian life was a slow, painful process. It didn't happen just overnight, but it was a very difficult transition. All of that isolation eventually led to addiction. I drank alcohol. I was on prescription medications with highly addictive properties, opiates, benzos. Eventually, it felt normal just to take and isolate. I had a seizure coming off of some medication. I found myself engaged in criminal behaviors, trying to get more of the medicine that I was already prescribed. I don't think I learned my lesson the typical way. I don't think my transition from recovery happened by somebody telling me you need help. I had to get thrown in jail. Prison was kind of where, and that was before I met Ken and Janie. So when you're sitting there with gang activity going on all around you, fights and people's heads getting busted open, 2 feet away from you, and the violence, and that was kind of where I'm like, I need to go a different way. That was a slow process too. Yeah. So it started with AA groups and a Bible study, actually, when I was incarcerated. That's where it really started. And I came out of prison. I started going to men's groups in my church and meeting with people like Ken also, building a sober support network that understood my story, that understood the difficulties of transitioning from military to civilian life, the difficulties of transitioning from prison to civilian life, the difficulties of transitioning from addiction to regular civilian life. And they met me with a compassion that I needed. I didn't love myself at this point, right? Because the stigma in society is that you're not worthy of love, or these people, the community that I built through showing up into these rooms and being vulnerable, that was key to me going on this journey of finding out why do I carry so much pain, and why do I cope with substance. And in that journey, the more I shared my story, the more people thought and encouraged me to write my story down. So I did, just kind of in a manifest healing that comes with recovery type of thing. And what started off as journaling turned into a manuscript, turned into a published book. That started the process of using my story as a catapult to provide for myself and my family. I started a media company, started podcasting about recovery, started getting involved with a lot of people that helped me network into Hollywood and talk about maybe possibly doing a script for my movie and what that might look like. And so I guess why I say all that is because it's amazing kind of the work that God does in your life when you're willing to show up for yourself. That was huge. That's a huge part of this story. I'd say trust your gut, never give up. It's worth it. You're strong, you're brave, you're bold, you're a soldier, you're worth fighting for. Society may look at you a type of way. There's going to be judgment. That doesn't mean that the judgment is correct. Quite frankly, you're going to have to rise above a lot of judgment and stigmas that come with life. But their judgment doesn't define you. Your past doesn't define you. Any sort of mistakes, any sort of PTSD, any sort of mental health struggle doesn't define you. You are worthy and you are worth fighting for. And don't give up. Veterans Help and Wellness Alliance love their veterans. And I'm living proof.